Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Matheus D'Andadre. I am the curatorial assistant at the Museum of São Paulo, and I am going to be the mediator in today's panel. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to all of you joining us live, or those of you who are watching the replay on YouTube. This is the third panel in our Queer Histories seminar. It is organized by Adriano Pedrosa, artistic director, and André Mesquita, curator, Davi Ribeiro, and also Julia, deputy assistant of the museum. I would like to let you know that after the three presentations in today's session, we are going to have a Q&A session. So please feel free to ask your questions using the chat. Later, we are also going to make available to you the attendance list for all of you who want to receive a certificate. You are going to receive the certificate if you attended yesterday's session and today's session. Another reminder is that the seminar is being broadcast in 3 links on YouTube. In one of them, you are going to hear the speakers in their original language, and the other ones are for English and Portuguese. So to kick off our seminar, each speaker will have 20 minutes, and we are going to start with Ellen Powell. She's going to talk about the history and challenges of LGBTQ rights in Hong Kong. She is an artist and began her career working behind the scenes doing sound mixing and creating photo collages. She later started making art with Super 8 and Video 8 while working in the field of medical imaging. In 1986, she co-founded Videotage, a collective of independent artists. In 1996, the Microwave New Media Art Festival. Her work explores themes of gender and identity. She received an ACC Award in 1992 and represented Hong Kong at the Venice Biennale in 2001. One of her notable works, Song of the Goddess, explored the lives of classical Cantonese opera singers. Thank you very much, Ellen, for your participation, and please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Today, my title of this talk is about the history of Hong Kong LGBTQ. The title is The Evolution of LGBTQ plus rights in Hong Kong amid political shift. Today, we find ourselves embarking on an exploration of the intricate journey of LGBTQ plus rights in Hong Kong, a city where the East meets the West and modernity intermingle with traditional, and aspiration meets reality. It represents a unique backdrop against which we can trace the evolution of this right. Slide 2. In Hong Kong, the movement advocating for gay and lesbian rights follow different trajectories from the 80s. The gay rights movement primarily centered on culture, sex education, and party life, while feminist groups organize study groups on lesbianism, feminism, and social programs to help women to be independent. These differences likely stem from the deep-rooted patriarchal feudal ideas prevalent in Chinese society. Men unable to produce offspring were considered unfilial, and women are seen as being mothers and housewives who are economic dependents on men. In this cultural landscape, gay men were married and raised their kids, while lesbians' relationship mostly cannot strive after the girls graduate from school. Several LGBTQ movies from Hong Kong tell stories of this generation. A more recent attempt is the award-winning film Sok Sok, directed by Ray Leung in 2019. I have a small trailer in slide 3. You can watch 2 minutes of the movie.
我嚟香港嗰陣時，乜都冇，兩手空空。
預備好，3、2、1，笑。
而家有層樓，有頭家，都算係咁啦。
爺爺，你肯退休嘅話，日日都可以接麗麗啦。
退休？唔好啩，日日望天打卦，而家咪幾好？
喂，老豆啊，做咗成世仲唔夠啊？你趁住而家仲行得走得。
你成日嚟呢度啊？你個樣咧就似結咗婚。
我以前呢20幾年，每日踩18個鐘。
我唔係走寶。
阿仔，你哋兩個應該都唔止10年啦，
嗬？做咩唔落車啊？唔捨得我啊？
啊，係喎，你呢排做狐狸精做成點啫？
你點會知啫？冇可能嘅。
我個仔翻嚟啊，我唔同你傾住，我下次再約你啊。
上堂啊，同志遊行嗰陣時就俾爛鬼電視台影到我啦，啲街坊一見到就個個喺度唱我啦。
如果連你都唔講嘢，咁將來邊個代表我哋上去出聲呢？為咗前途啦，而被逼結婚，做咗我哋圈中所講嘅食人，好不容易捱到晚年啦，但我哋都唔可以做翻我哋自己。
我而家揀老公唔係男朋友啊，嫁咗係一世噶啦。
如果係整定啊，下世都會撞得翻嘅，唔使驚。
However, the landscape began to change in 1991. The Legislative Council passed a law that decriminalized sexual acts between consenting gay men. This was a significant step forward towards equality and human rights, sparked by comments from the British colony Governor Murray McLeod in 1980s. However, it should be noted that the age of consent was set higher for gay men, which is 21 years old, than for heterosexual couples, which is 16 years old. A decision that would later face multiple legal challenges. While same-sex acts between women has never been explicitly illegal, lesbian relationships face social stigma. These laws, once common across many British colonies, are still in place in some regions today. In 1993, former legislator Anna Wu proposed an equal opportunity bill to outlaw discrimination on several grounds, including sex, disability, age, race, and sexuality. However, the bill passed in 1995. Sexuality was not included in the final legislation. The bill targeted at sexual orientation, anti-discrimination, was put to death in 1996 by an inherently flawed consultation exercise. After the handover of Hong Kong to China in 1997, the gay rights movement diversified into education and advocacy events, while the battlefield in the legislation continued in a different societal landscape. The turn of the millennium. Slide 5. The turn of the millennium marked a surge in organized LGBT plus activism. The inaugural Pride Parade in 2002 signified a shift from invisibility to visibility and silence to voice. The event official website claimed that the number of participants nearly doubled in 2012 than that of 2011. Its organizer, Connie Chen, in 2012 said that Hong Kong is the only city in China open for gay pride parades. And each year, there are 1/3 of the parade participants being mainlanders from China. Slide 6. And it also attracts criticism from mainland. This opinion from South China Morning Post headlined, China's LGBTQ community doesn't need Western gay pride. For LGBT people in China, sexuality is part, not all, of who they are as their family role and national identity take precedence. What they want most is love and acceptance, not pride parades. Slide 7. The Hong Kong Bill of Rights Ordinance was utilized to challenge discrimination regarding the age of consent. In 2005, the High Court ruled that laws prohibiting men under 21 from engaging in sexual acts with each other were unconstitutional. The decision was in response to William Roy Leung filing of a judicial review challenging the criminal ordinance, which has prohibited sex between men if one or both were aged under 21, but allow heterosexual and lesbian couples to have sex at the age of 16 and above. In 2013, the Court of Final Appeal ruled in favor of a transgender woman identified as W, granting transgender people the right to marry. This ruling pushed Hong Kong to redefine its legal definition of sex and result in the establishment of an interdepartmental working group on gender recognition to oversee legal and administrative changes. The case also became a legal reference for later judicial review that have challenged the institution of marriage. Despite progress, hurdles remain. The main opposition to stop discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity often comes from social conservatives with evangelical Christian ties, slide 8, and alliance with the Chinese authority, slide 8. It has been more than 20 years since China decriminalized homosexuality, but LGBT people in mainland are still subject to forced confinement, medication, and even electric shocks to try to change their sexual orientation. Despite being widely discredited and condemned as harmful by numerous medical and psychological organizations worldwide, there are no laws in Hong Kong that specifically ban conversion therapy. This practice continues, underscoring the persistent social and legal hurdles unsuccessful. In 2018, the highest court of law ruled in favor of a lesbian woman known in the case as QT. After the judicial review against the Immigration Department's decision to deny her dependent visa, QT and her partner, referred to as SS in court documents, had entered into a civic partnership in Britain shortly before SS secured employment in Hong Kong, prompting the move to the city in 2011. The landmark ruling confirmed that the status of marriage and civil union partnership for same-sex couples would be recognized in Hong Kong for the specific purpose of a dependent visa. However, the decision did not alter the city's definition of marriage as a union between a man and a woman. Notably, the case also set a precedent that any government discrimination favoring heterosexual couples over same-sex ones without legitimate reasons was unlawful. Next slide. And more court cases bring the movement forward. In 2019, civil servants, same-sex spouse win rights to benefits. Decriminalization of sexual act between men. Court uphold traditional definition of marriage. Ricky Ju Man Kin, who took over the helm of the Equal Opportunity Commission in April 2019, said the new approach to tackle discrimination against sexual minorities and same-sex marriage would involve inserting protections into existing laws, rather than advocating for one overarching legislation as in the past. Progress in transgender rights and recognition of same-sex couple. In February this year, the Court of Final Appeal ruled against the precondition of sexual reassignment surgery for changing the sex list on a person identification card, a monumental win for the transgender community. Last month, September 5th. Next slide. The Court of Final Appeal instructed the government to establish a legal framework for recognizing same-sex partnership. The court, however, ruled against recognizing same-sex marriage after finding the Basic Law, which is the mini constitution of Hong Kong under one country, two systems. They found this specifically favor opposite sex union. Next slide. At the end of 2020, the Sun Pride Foundation hosts Mythmakers Spectral Synthesis 3, the first major LGBTQ art exhibition in Hong Kong at Dai Kwun, a center for heritage and art. The exhibition was meant to coincide with Hong Kong's hosting of the Gay Games, Sports and Culture event. But despite this being delayed, it has gone ahead. Next slide. The Sun Pride Foundation, established in 2014 by Hong Kong entrepreneur Patrick Sun, is dedicated to fostering greater understanding and acceptance of the LGBTQ+ community through the universal language of art. The foundation believes that arts and culture are powerful tools for social change and strive to use art as a vehicle to explore and promote LGBTQ+ rights, diversity, and equality. Next slide. Mythmakers Spectral Synthesis 3 was an ambitious exhibition that brought together works from over 50 artists from across Asia, each with their unique perspective on LGBT+ identity and experience. The exhibition featured a diverse range of artistic mediums, including painting, sculpture, photography, video, and performance art. Next slide. Despite its success, hosting Mythmakers Spectral Synthesis 3 was not without challenges. Given the increasingly conservative political climate in Hong Kong following the implementation of the national security law, there were tightening of censorship and fears that the exhibition may upset the Chinese government. An artwork was removed from the show. The work removed was a video from Taiwanese American artist Xu Lijiang's 3x3x6 series, a mixed media installation allowing the story of 10 jailed sexual and gender nonconformists. In the show, it was replaced by a document of rejection for explicit sexual content. The piece debuted at the 2019 Venice Biennial. In the show, another piece by a participating Indian artist was reportedly also altered ahead of the exhibition. Next slide. However, the Sun Pride Foundation remains committed to its mission. The team worked closely with Dai Kwun and various stakeholders to ensure that the exhibition was sensitive to the local context while still staying true to its message. Next slide. In August 2023, Hong Kong's public broadcaster Radio Television Hong Kong, RTHK, announced the suspension of its long-running LGBTQ+ radio program, We Are Family. For 17 years, this show has been a beacon for LGBTQ+ community in the city, providing a platform for discourse, representation, and support. The official reasons given for the suspension was rearrangement of programs. However, many critics and LGBTQ plus advocates have interpreted this as a politically motivated move, influenced by the enactment of the national security law in 2020. The cancellation of We Are Family was not entirely unexpected. Since the impulsions of the national security law, the media landscape in Hong Kong has become increasingly tense and constrained. Several news outlets has been closed down, and journalists has faced increasingly pressure to align the contents with national policy. RTHK, as a public broadcaster, is obligated to adhere to these national policies. The suspension of We Are Family can be seen in this light, a move to align RTHK's programming more closely with the government's stance, rather than a decision based purely on audience demand or program quality. Despite the broader political climate, the cancellation of We Are Family has been seen as a significant setback for the LGBTQ plus community in Hong Kong. For many years, the show has been a rare mainstream platform for the community, for their voice and issues in the city. The show's suspension leaves a void and is unlikely to be filled by other mainstream media outlets. This lack of representation can have serious implications for the visibility and acceptance of the LGBTQ plus community in Hong Kong, potentially contributing to increased stigma and discrimination. Next slide. In the face of the censorship and societal uncertainty, the work of cultural producers like filmmakers Ray Leung, broadcaster Leung Xiaofai, a multimedia artist Anson Mac becomes even more significant. They play a vital role in preserving the rich history and narratives of marginalized communities, including the LGBTQ plus community in Hong Kong. Anson Mac is a seasoned filmmaker, and she finally gotten the support from LGBTQ activists and have recently announced her latest project, a documentary focusing on the history of the LGBTQ plus community. I believe that art and culture are powerful tools for social change. Hong Kong society generally accept the LGBTQ plus, and we are fighting to preserve the good values, human rights, and propel us forward. Next slide. The journey towards LGBTQ plus equality in Hong Kong is ongoing on the legal court. Each progressive ruling and recognition marks an important step forward for Hong Kong. Taiwan landmark decision to legalize same-sex marriage, a first in Asia, served as a beacon of hope and potential pathway for greater inclusivity and equality across Chinese societies. Thank you for your listening.
Muito obrigado, Ellen, pela excelente apresentação.
Thank you very much, Alan, for the excellent presentation. We will talk more about that later. Our listeners can send questions using the chat, and we are going to comment on that later. Now we are going to turn over to Stella Nyong'o, and Stella is a researcher of the Nelson Mandela University, has achieved her PhD degree from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, an MSc in the Metrical Anthropology from University of College in London, and a BA in Mass Communication and Literature from Makeda University. In her research, she specializes in queer African studies, African feminism, dissident studies, and sexual and reproductive health rights. She's also a poet, activist, and a politician belonging to Uganda's opposition political party. Welcome. And feel free to start your presentation, Stella.
Acho que o seu microfone
I think your microphone is muted.
Estela está nos ouvindo?
Stella, I think your microphone is muted.
Okay, so I'll share again. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
And can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So thank you very much. My name is Stella Nyanzi. As I've been introduced, I want to thank very much the organizers for inviting me and for creating this opportunity to talk about art in a museum and queerness. I will talk about excavating, digging up, pulling out African queer histories from a Ugandan location. And I want to say that in terms of Africa and the knowledge that's been produced about our continent, the dominant discourses that are available in academic scholarship, in creative artistic productions, often depict Africa as a dark, exotic, mysterious, unknowable, impenetrable continent. Often the people are presented as backward, undeveloped. We are full of diseases, ignorance, hunger, civil war. We lack human rights. We don't have infrastructure. We don't know human rights. And our leaders are militant, autocratic despots who are corrupt and steal from the people. And so the images around Africa and the knowledge that is produced about Africa, particularly from the global north or from the south outside Africa, tends to be of a very mysterious place without much light. I want to say that against this dominant background is also a paucity, very little information coming out about queer African people, LGBTIQ. Yesterday we heard about a local name from South Africa and the local African cultures that involve queerness, non-conforming gender identities or same-sex sexualities, non-heteronormative sexualities are often presented as being an African, as if queerness cannot be African. And a lot of the existing, although still small body of work tends to be produced by outsiders, white people, brown people coming from the global north into Africa. Very rarely is the work produced on queer people from African queer people. The other sort of knowledge that is produced has been produced by mainly cisgender heterosexual allies and scholars such as myself, who do not share the same same-sex sexualities or non-gender conforming identities. And so I want to talk about excavating African queer histories from a very specific location in Uganda, my home country, which adds a layer of criminalization on top of the invisibilization, the negative stereotypes and depictions of Africa, the representation of the un-Africanness of homosexuality or same-sex desire and same-sex loving people and non-gender conforming identities, is the question from Uganda around criminalization of homosexualities. And as many people may know, in 2023, this year, not long ago, not last year, not last decade or a century before, my country, Uganda, recriminalized homosexuality by introducing the anti-homosexuality bill, which was passed into an act of parliament by our members of parliament and signed by our president. A lot of the hype around this law has been because it reintroduces the death penalty for people who are convicted of aggravated homosexuality. It also introduces the life sentence for anybody convicted of homosexuality. And it has multi-levels of crimes that are proposed and penalties thereof, ranging from a few years in prison to monetary fines to closures of premises and denial of permits and licenses. I want to say that much less attention has been given to what has been called the promotion of homosexuality, a section within this new law, Section 11 on promotion of homosexuality. And this is important when we talk about knowledge production. What does it mean to talk about working with queer knowledge, producing queer knowledge in a context like Uganda, where one might get up to 20 years in prison just for producing knowledge, where one might also have to pay monetary fines, have a license suspended for 10 years, or in fact, the license might be cancelled. When knowledge production, having a conversation like this, displaying photographs of pride, any sort of knowledge that normalizes homosexuality is criminalized. What does it mean for us to talk about archiving, producing, distributing, sharing, even excavating, the exercise I want to do, queer knowledge? And I want to say that out of the 5 definitions in the law for what promotion of homosexuality is, I have underlined very clearly that one is about knowledge production. So 1 out of the 5 definitions says a person promotes homosexuality if the person knowingly advertises, publishes, prints, broadcasts, distributes, or causes the advertisement, publication, printing, broadcasting, or distribution by any means, including the use of computer, information system, or the internet of any material, a rainbow flag, a photograph, a text message, an SMS, anything promoting or encouraging homosexuality or the committing of an offense under this act. And so any of us here doing the sort of work we are doing could be sentenced to up to 20 years in prison. I have been a prisoner in Uganda because of writing poetry. I don't want to be sentenced ever again in those maximum security prisons that are run by a dictator. So what does it mean to produce knowledge when it is criminalized? I want to say that my current project, a new piece of scholarship, I'm a dissident, I'm a politician and a poet and an academic who does dissident knowledge production. I have a very academic, political ambition to create knowledge as a form of resistance. When they say no, we say yes. When they say stop, we say go. And I've been calling for queer knowledge production against the odds of being criminalized and facing up to 20 years in prison. In a recent paper I published, I talked about academic freedom for queer African scholars in Uganda becoming a daily practice of conscious resistance, when knowledge is not just about producing knowledge because of its beauty, because of extending science, because of, you know, highlighting an issue and setting an agenda, and it becomes resistance against homophobic legislation. It is important that people are strategic in our refusal for state-led homophobic silencing. And so the kind of knowledge I'm calling for is one that is already criminalized, and the work we do as knowledge producers is going to be done within a context of real fear. We're afraid. In that paper, I was talking much more about academic freedom for queer Africans, and I was calling for multidisciplinary scholarship. And I didn't really look at art. A year earlier, I had called for methods of queering queer Africa, and I'd called for innovation and creativity and multidisciplinarity. And I had called for a combination of both scholarship and social activism, and focusing on the real lived lives, lived realities of local queer Africans in Uganda. Now, in that work, I hadn't really thought about the role that art and creativity can play in this resistance, creating queer knowledge as a form of dissident resistance, subversive knowledge creation. And so I want to turn at different forms of art and creativity, in addition to scholarship, whether it's history or biology, STEM, science, technology, economics, or mathematics, or social activism in the streets, online, etc., to see how we can corroborate these different genres of knowledge to form a queer dissident knowledge production machinery located in Uganda, about Ugandans, for Ugandans, and then I want to dare the homophobic state to come and arrest us and sue us, and then we shall see if our science and our art are sound, if our activism is solid, what the charges will be, who will prosecute us, and what will be done to fight for our freedom, because that's a necessary form of public litigation. So moving on, I want to say that therefore, in terms of thinking about creating art as a form of resistance and dissident knowledge production, I turn to the work of somebody called Zanele Muholi, who is a South African artist who gave us the conceptualization of going beyond visual art to visual activism. And very quickly, hopefully I can turn to Zetu's YouTube, Zanele's YouTube and show it.
I'm a visual activist. Because we deal with photographs, it's maybe easier to say you're a visual artist. So this to respect all parties concerned, I prefer to be a visual activist because most of the issues that I try to deal with in my work, they deal with human rights, and human rights being, believing in the importance of self-representation, the importance of owning your voice, the importance of speaking out wherever there's a need, the importance of saying to whoever that might not have access to spaces to say, let's hop along, let's come along. So I had a choice to come to Philadelphia and just work on my own and be comfortable. But then I suggested when I was invited to come on residency here that I'm allowed to work with the locals because they have something to say, and also to see how one maneuver the space with the people who might not have access to different spaces. Yeah. So visual activism is basically dealing with an agenda, a political agenda, and using visuals as means of articulation.
Right. So that was Zanele Muholi. I will quickly turn back to my presentation. Right. Zanele Muholi has told us that basically visual activism is producing art with an agenda, a political agenda, and using visuals as a means of articulation. I want to build this idea of visual activism by working with photographs, a queer archive that is already existent in Uganda. I want to look at 5 photographers that I met in the last 10, 12 years of doing ethnography in Uganda. And I want to propose a way in which by excavating these photographs of these photographers, it is possible to follow the art and see where it leads in terms of queer lives and subjectivities and the connections with everyday life in Uganda as a way of saying that queerness permeates everyday forms of living as individuals, in communities, but also within institutions. And so I am sharing, I don't know if you can see all, yes. I'm sharing the photos of the 5 photographers very quickly and briefly, whose work I will be speaking to. And I was wondering, who are these photographers and what is their relationship as insiders or outsiders to the topic of being queer in Uganda? How can these people have obtained the photographs that they were able to obtain? We've got people whose names are all foreign to Ugandanness. So who are these people? How close are they to the theme they are photographing? Denver is an American, one is a Frenchman, a Japanese, Spanish Mexican, a Ugandan. They're from all the continents of the world. We even have Latin America. Most of them are working as photographers as their main form of income generation, although many of them are also photojournalists or writers or educators and teachers, and some include activism in their work. In terms of accessing these photographs, they have exhibited and archived them in different spaces. For example, Frédéric Noy, the Frenchman, has a lot of photographs that have won awards regionally in Europe, in France, but also in East Africa. He's also sent a lot of photographs that include all themes from queerness to environmental degradation, to politics in Uganda, to women's rights in Uganda, and also Kazakhstan and Rwanda. And so he's an interesting character because he posits and positions queer photography within the broader canvas of what he does. I met KG at Pride, where I was the Grand Marshal, and he took my photo in perhaps 2014. And then I later met him in Japan, where he was talking about the photographs, and he had made a book. He also has exhibitions, and his journey follows gay lives, gay men's lives from New York to Uganda and Nairobi, and then to Tokyo. And so there are different sorts of archives, but I want, because of time, to just focus on one specific one. In terms of the proximity, many are outsiders to the geography and culture of the people, but in terms of the stories they tell about themselves as they're introducing their photographs, some identify as transgender, non-gendered, queer, heterosexual ally, or gay man. And so I want to turn now to the work of David, the first photographer that I showed from America, who was at Beach Pride Uganda, the first inaugural Pride event we had in Uganda. He took a couple of photos. He sent 12 of these photos to a competition within an art award. And as he was nominated to be one of the winners, and the 12 pictures were put together with 12 narratives of LGBTIQ people, some of them coming out for the first time and telling their story. And these were published on The Advocate magazine's website. And that was 2012. In 2013, they were published. And then in 2014, the first Anti-Homosexuality Act was signed in Uganda. 2 days after this act was signed, a newspaper, a tabloid, used one of the photographs that David Denver had in a very salacious public outing where they claim that homosexual people were talking about how they became homos. The names of people were then put into another issue of the same red paper tabloid. Photos were taken from this issue, and the stories that David Denver had published alongside the photos he took from Pride were reproduced in this very dangerous red paper tabloid. A number of issues of the red paper tabloid kept on exposing, naming, and putting faces and addresses to individuals who had given the stories. What is interesting is that David Denver then sued the red paper in court, and this for me rose related to the story of several other tabloids which have been pointing pictures of who Uganda's homosexuals are, including their faces, the most notorious one being the Rolling Stone, which carried a lead story that had David Kato's photo, and inside they were calling for the hanging of homosexuals, hang them. A short while later, after David had also sued the Rolling Stone paper, he was murdered by a blow to the head. He was hit by the head on the hammer, and he died. And I think for me that what is interesting from following the photography journeys of David Denver's archive, I've just picked one out of the 5 photographers and one photo out of the many that are available, that one sees how a photographer who came to Beach Pride has a number of pathways if one follows where his photos have gone. they have gone and they reveal we have Pride commemorations. What happened after Beach Pride 2012? Have there been any other Pride marches? In terms of legislation, when he sues the government of Uganda, we understand their copyright laws, we have rights to privacy laws, and the anti-homosexuality law is also there. You know, there are stories about exodus and exile and asylum and refugee and resettlement. There are stories about what happens in the newspapers in Uganda and freedom of expression vis-a-vis the right to privacy. And we follow awards and recognition in Africa, in East Africa, in America, all over the world. And so what I'm trying to say is that by following the photographs from the archive, one can go into all sorts of pathways leading all over the Ugandan society. And I think for me that when knowledge creation has been criminalized, one of the important ways we can work with these archives is not to situate first the queer body, but to see where else the photographs and the archival material might lead. Maybe it will lead into the judicial processes and how queer people navigate these judicial processes when they are sued or they sue others. We see bold LGBTIQ Ugandans organizing, having pride, organizing against these notorious homophobic newspapers that are outing them. And I think for me that from just the story of one photographer out of 5, following a few of his photographs, it is possible to create queer knowledge even in a time of criminalization. This is ongoing work. It is still fresh. But in terms of building resistance, I think that taking photographs and following them wherever they may lead is one important way in which we can do queer dissident knowledge creation. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Stella Nyanzi. Foi muito bom.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stella Nyanzi. It was great to hear from you. We are still receiving many questions in the chat, and we are going to address them right after the next presentation, which is going to talk about the place of LGBTQIA+ memories in Brazilian society. Tony Boita, a museologist and psychoanalyst, holds a PhD in communication, a master's degree in anthropology, and a BA in museology. Since 2011, he takes part in and developed teaching, research, and extension projects related to vulnerable Brazilian populations. He is the editor of magazine Memórias LGBTQIA+, and coordinator of Rede LGBTQIA+. Tony, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mateus, and thank you very much to all organizers of this great event. I am very happy to be here with you. I would also like to thank Stella and Ellen for your wonderful presentations. And David, thank you very much for inviting me. This is a very important moment for Brazil. Over the past months, Brazil has gone through a very scary moment. Some of the rights that we now have as LGBTQA+ people have been questioned and challenged by the legislative branch. We are at the risk of taking steps back in our history. So, what is the place of our memories in society, in Brazilian society, as LGBTQ+ people? So I would like to propose a reflection about where these memories are. They do exist, as my fellow panel members presented in their different realities. We can see that even in the face of persecution and violence and prejudice, there is still resistance. There are dissident bodies out there fighting, struggling to ensure the right to memory, to history. These are political bodies that are resisting all along, although they know that at any time they might be killed, they might be murdered, or be subject to violence. So, what is the place of LGBTQ+ memories in Brazilian society? Let's go to the next slide, please. Well, I would like to show you a few figures. They are very important so that we can lay the backdrop for our analysis. In 2023, there was a survey conducted by Marta Cantiliano, Lucas Ribeiro, and other researchers, including cis, trans, and also maroon populations, about the position taken by LGBTQ plus populations in Brazil. There is an agency, a public agency in Brazil that aims at promoting public policies for all museums in Brazil, and it manages 30 museums all around the country. So this survey focused on those 30 museums. This material is made available in the archives of the National Memory Museum, and this survey aimed at looking at the memories promoted by those 30 museums. 76.6% of those museums promote heterosexual history memory, 73.3% masculine history, 63.3% white memory, 83.3% promote elite memory, and 97% of them promote cis memories. So what we are seeing here is that the museums linked to the National Museum Institute, all of them, or most of them, focused on preserving hetero, white, elite, cis, male memories. And we are talking about museums that are cis, white, and masculine museums. Isn't this interesting? Brazil is such a huge country, and it promotes almost exclusively one single type of narrative. Now, how is that related to violence? How is that related to racism and LGBTQ phobia? But we should also think about the other side of this. Only 3.3% of the museums linked to this agency includes in its mission the diversity, sexual and gender diversity as a category. So a country that is mostly made up of women with a high number of LGBTQ plus people, there's only a small percentage of memories related to promoting those people. And only 3% of those museums dedicate their mission to indigenous peoples and the African Brazilian populations. Among those 30 museums, there is no decolonial mention, there is no mission exhibition or long-lasting spaces and exhibits related to Maroon communities, riparian communities, and other classes like Jews and other ethnicities. So there are no museums in Brazil linked to that agency related to the people living in underprivileged communities, including favelas. So what we can conclude from this is that the predominant population on which these museums focus come from a heterosexual, masculine, white, elitist, and cis background. We are talking about a country that has very progressive laws for LGBTQ plus populations. Despite of that, these populations are excluded and made invisible in these spaces that promote memory. Now, as I asked earlier, how is this related to violence? Well, according to a survey that was just published, it is published actually by the Observatory of Deaths and Violence against LGBTQ plus people in Brazil. And these are just some of the figures that we can identify, because there's no serious policy to monitor and map these deaths. So there are some NGOs and some media outlets that are trying to calculate those numbers. In 2022 alone, 58.24% of trans and travestis were killed, 159 deaths. So again, Brazil is one of the countries that kills the most women, trans women, and travestis in the world. We had 96 deaths of gay men, 8 deaths of trans men, and 8 lesbians were killed, and so on and so forth. Now let's take a look at the ages of those people. 33% of those deaths, 91 deaths, were perpetrated against people from 20 to 29 years of age. So young LGBTQ plus people are being murdered in this country. When museums become silent, they also become accountable for this. But what do I mean by that? Well, if you are promoting hegemony, if you are promoting a cisgender white male memory, then you are confirming or you are supporting these deaths and this violence. And if you look at these people's color, you can see that most of them are black. Here in Brazil, LGBTQ people that suffer violence the most, they are colored people. What might come as a surprise to you and Stella and Ellen is that the 2 most frequent causes of those deaths are fire guns, with 74 people killed by fire guns, and stabbing, and 15 deaths by beating, 48 by stabbing, and the most shocking one. In 2022, 10 people were stoned to death. People threw stones at them. So in 2022, in Brazil, a country where we have a very advanced legislation protecting LGBTQ plus people in the world, 10 people were murdered by stoning. And also strangling. So all of those deaths are extremely violent. They come after torture and persecution. They are usually accompanied also by collective rape. Usually, LGBTQ plus people that are murdered in Brazil are also tortured. Next slide, please. But we should remember that this type of phobia in Brazil, LGBTQ plus phobia in Brazil, is a crime. The Supreme Court, the Brazilian Supreme Court, ruled that this is a crime, but in reality, dissident bodies are still violently murdered. And when they decide not to be silent, when they go to the police, they are threatened once again. Unfortunately, there are many cases of LGBTQ plus people that went to those spaces of memory to let people know about their violence, the violence that they suffered, and they have been ignored or threatened. Next one, please.
Even so, despite the violence I've just described, and with this process of invisibilization of memory spaces that insist to ignore these dissident bodies, there are still some actions in Brazil, initiatives that are not in conventional museums, that chose to ignore our bodies. In 2012, we created the LGBT Network of Memory and Social Museology. We also have the LGBT Memories Journal that was established in 2013. We also hold every year a seminar of museums memory and museology for LGBT communities. And we also establish partnerships with other people to encourage research. While many researchers focus on persecution and death, we focus on how museums see those deaths. And I dare say that museums ignore those deaths. Oftentimes, they even support those deaths. They are responsible for the violence against our bodies in this country. There are others who are constantly fighting against that, but this is a country with over 3,000 museums. How many museums do you know that have initiatives focused on the LGBTQIA+ community? There are 41 spaces of memory like this museum that is hosting this event that promote initiatives for LGBT people, and also ensuring the employability of those bodies that oftentimes are excluded from the job market, especially if you have more effeminated traits. There are several community museums and conventional museums, totaling 41 museums, 41 out of 3,000. So this is a very small number of actions. 41 is not even the number of death of trans and travesty people in 2022. We need to leverage those actions.
Então, esses indicadores, né? Esse é trabalho de uma cartografia.
This is a cartography work. This is part of my master's degree dissertation that try to indicate actions that are conducted all over the world, focus on LGBTQIA+ people. So in Brazil, we focus on all Brazilian regions. We brought several examples of community initiatives, collective initiatives, collaborative initiatives in traditional or community museums or territory museums. Some of these initiatives
pontual e muito ligada a comunidades,
are isolated. Some of them are just focused on some communities, but they aim at promoting the memory, the history, also the basic rights that those titles are entitled to.
E aí nós temos alguns exemplos que valem a pena.
Some examples worth mentioning. The first one is the Museum of Sexual Diversity that is headquartered in São Paulo. It was one of the first institutionalized museums in Brazil and in Latin America. It was first established in the 90s by the Guida Bahia group, but this is a registered museum, and it went through all the bureaucracy required in Brazil to establish a museum. The mission of the Sexual Diversity Museum is to promote the stories and the memories of the LGBTQIA+ community. It is aligned with some museums in Peru, in Argentina, in Uruguay that have similar work. Latin America usually focuses more on archives rather than museums, but this is a very positive example we have. So we have LGBTQIA+ people that work in an intersection. Lineker, for example, a black trans woman in Brazil, an artist. So it's not the white gay man stereotype that is the most quote-unquote palatable body to depict LGBTQA+ actions in Brazil.
Nós temos ainda que foi criado em 2019. O
In
Museu
2019, we also had a Transgender Museum of History and Art called Motta. This is one of the largest initiatives we've ever had focused on LGBTQA+, especially travestis and trans people in the past 10 years. It's a virtual museum, very interactive, very dynamic, composed of trans people and travesty people that who manage these virtual spaces, develop research studies, develop training sessions, and several other initiatives, both on-site and online, for travesties and trans people. So for those who are not familiar with Motta, I invite you to read more about that because it's a wonderful initiative.
Nós temos ainda uma outra iniciativa comunitária
There
em
is
Vitória,
another community initiative in the city of Vitória, in the state of Espírito Santo, called Memory Point Aquendas Indacas. It focuses on actions for LGBTQIA+ people, and one of them relate to memory. So the team of the Aquendas Indacas group interviews LGBTQIA+ people who are elderly. They also develop actions focused on employability. During the pandemic of COVID-19, it distributed food products for LGBTQIA+ people who are in social vulnerability situation. And so those memory initiatives can go beyond the walls of museums because our bodies are not exclusively within those spaces. So this is why our brothers and sisters, our peers, sometimes they live on the streets and they require support. And museums play this very important role because oftentimes museums share the same spaces that these people go to. This is why museums are also responsible for these initiatives.
E o Instituto Brasileiro de Museus, que eu falei lá no início,
The
lembra?
Brazilian Institute of Museums that I mentioned in the beginning developed what is called the Spring of Museums, and the main topic is Memories and Democracy for LGBT+ people, indigenous peoples, and maroon peoples. So they focus on actions for these groups: indigenous, maroon, and LGBT+ people. Institutions do not have to do anything, but they are invited to develop initiatives. Based on preliminary data of a survey I'm conducting, we had over 2,500 actions conducted in over 800 institutions. Of these 2,500 actions, about 16% of them focused on LGBT+ people. This is really a very small number of these 2,500 initiatives. This means that museums do not want to work with our bodies in most of the cases. It's important to say that because we need to take those spaces to transform these institutions. We need to leverage their actions, and we need to make sure that we have the right of memory, of history, and human dignity in those spaces. This should be ensured to everyone and also to LGBTQIA+ people. This is my contact information, my Instagram profile, the website of the Memorial Journal, and my email. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muito obrigado, Tony, mas fica aí que agora...
Tony, but just hang in there because now we are going to have a Q&A and a round of debate. I would like to thank our three speakers and also our participants. Now let's move to the final part where we are going to take the questions from our participants, and also our guests can comment on them and can also ask questions. So Nalayaba sent us a question. She asks Tony specifically. It was very interesting to hear data about my reality. I'm an artist, I'm a travesty person, and I find it very difficult to expose my art or find a job as an artist. How do you see the future of our group in Brazilian art? Do you believe that visual art is the most excluding one, the one that is more focused on the elite? Yes, please go ahead and answer that question. 10 years ago, if you analyze arts and museums, we have made great progress. There's no doubt about that. But we need to fight so that we don't have any backlash. The arts field is a field of the elite, but it is more accessible, not in total, but in most cases, that other types of museums, because art is usually elitist. I see several museums, art museums today, promoting pieces of work and actions of travesties and trans people, and I do not see that in science museums, in history museums. And even if you consider that historically speaking, Trim, for example, mentions that during the HIV/AIDS crisis, the art museum really took HIV-positive artists, so they were more welcoming in general. But we do not know how they who they're going to welcome. Usually it's just white people. If it is a black trans woman, usually the doors are closed to her. So we need to take those spaces. We need to fight. We need to resist. We need to speak up. And we need to build networks. And I tell this to the Motta group. We need to create a group, a network of trans and travesty artists focused on art in Brazil. It's crucial to work in networks, because if you have a space that hosts these bodies, they welcomes these bodies, can bring others, and this can be a center, a hub, where there can be exchange in a museum like that, in a memory space like that. This is why it's so important establishing networks involving these people who want to make these changes. Unfortunately or fortunately, on their own or on our own, we cannot change our reality. I hope that I was able to answer your question.
Pessoal, pode continuar enviando as perguntas no
Please
chat.
keep sending your questions using the chat. It was interesting what you mentioned, Tony, saying that art museums usually are more welcoming. They work as spaces of resistance vis-a-vis other museums. And as Estela was saying about visual activism, I think it relates to that. And that raises a point that was also mentioned here in the chat. It's a question to Stella, but I believe that all of you can answer too, about the responsibilities of the Western world, of the colonialism. How can we demand them to take accountability of this, take responsibility of the queer dissident African artists?
Right. So, wonderful question. I think that the first problem around Africa and coloniality is that our colonial histories are not uniform. We had French colonizers, British colonizers, Portuguese, German, and now we have neo-imperialists from America and Europe and everywhere else. And I think that part of the decolonial mission is to first identify what the colonizers, well, for example, a clear example is the one from all the Anglophone, the Commonwealth countries today have got this colonial legacy of bad laws. Yeah, the anti-buggery, anti-sodomy laws began in Victorian times with the British Queen, and then they travel I think first to India, Australia, come into Africa via Nigeria, and then they land in my country. And so the laws that we have are not new laws. We inherited them during colonialism. In terms of, therefore, how we speak to the Western world, I think that the colonial history and the colonial legacy demands that we first speak to the colonizers and what they did to our different countries in terms of their colonial legacy. In Uganda, it was the British. And yet, as we saw in Ellen's wonderful historical presentation of the law, Britain, the UK decriminalized homosexuality way back, decades ago. And yet we still have a replica of their law going on. However, the French had an assimilation process and policy in their colonial encounter with the Francophone countries. And so one thing I want to say first is to specifically look at different Western empire representatives and understand what colonial historical legacies they left us. The British left us a bad law. The French left assimilation, and their countries are more open, although they're more open and more protective of queer rights, although they may have a very much dependency process. And so former French colonies have got art, funds that come directly from Paris, going into the African countries. In Uganda, there isn't. In Uganda, and actually in many British Commonwealth countries, former British colonies, there's no funding for art by the former colonizer. And so in terms of protection, there's also provision. I would first of all say, can the pre-colonizer, former colonizers work with our governments to establish better laws? Can they put some pressure around legal reform? In other countries, we have seen decriminalization happening. In Uganda, we decriminalized in 2014. And now in 2023, we are recriminalizing, and the silence of a lot of the Western countries is unacceptable for those of us who are anti-imperialist and anti-colonial. And so we're asking for pressure just around the law, because the foreign dominant countries also give a lot of aid to our governments. And so the aid could come with conditionalities around funding, defunding, and funding, because that external pressure is important, especially around protecting rights. And then I think in terms of building art, one of the things I've been thinking around the queer photographers who are coming into Uganda is this critique that when the bodies producing the art, the queer art, are not Black and not African, what the government tends to say, what the homophobes and the critics tend to say is, that is a Western agenda. That is a neo-imperialist agenda. It is not African when a white American man, even if he may be gay, comes and takes photographs alone. And so I was thinking perhaps working, I think it is Tony who talked about networks and collaborating with others. If the external artists who have whatever skills and technology and access to public exhibition spaces can come and collaborate with local artists and build capacity and create a protection and establish networks. And even if it means being extractive right now and getting the material from Uganda, from Africa, from whatever global southern location, and taking it abroad, especially if it's dangerous or criminalized to exhibit or publish this work, that is one way of going. And I'm so envious of Brazil when Tony shows a map that has so many museums, so many galleries that are actually exhibiting queer art. You don't know how lucky you are. I know you said 41 is very small. In Uganda, no museum at all whatsoever can be boldly pro-queer. It will be shut down. The art will be taken away. The artists will be decommissioned. Probably they'll be sued. And so I think for me that therefore collaborations, one with the Western world, but also South to South collaborations are important, because I think for me it is striking that the artists and the queers and the queer artists in places like Brazil and also China are doing a lot of work that is progressive. Of course, our legal regimes are different. Uganda is perhaps the most homophobic place to be right now for creators of knowledge. But I think for me, even within the context of risk, Western, Northern, outsider, governments, institutions, individuals, artists, queer allies can come and do work with Uganda, particularly if they have the protection. So yes, there's the how do we protect ourselves from recolonization or imperialism, but I think for me much more important, the question is how do we continue producing knowledge right now in collaboration with others, and then we shall deal with the decolonization question after we have refused the silencing and the re-invisibilization, the re-erasure. I think for me it's important to just keep producing whatever work we can through whatever channels. And as we work in partnership, of course, to always be aware of the intersectionality of race and class and power and gender and orientation. All of these are important, but I think for me right now, the biggest danger is silencing and erasure. And if we don't resist in whichever form we can, in collaboration with even the colonizer, there are places where I've been in academic conferences and said, even you British colonizers, come and produce the colonized work. But perhaps that is better than silencing. We are speaking back at a critical, important, anti-gender, anti-queer movement that's working in Africa, but also in the West. I live in Germany, in the West, in Hungary, in Poland, and we see it even in North America. So I haven't answered the question directly, but I've kind of given you my ideas around working with a decolonial mission and with colonizing others who are important because they have the resources and the protection, and the law in their country favors production of knowledge for queer people.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite the other speakers, Ellen and Tony, if you would like to make comments and add to what Stella said, that would be great. If you have any comments to make, please feel free. If not, I would like to piggyback on what Stella said and ask more directly about what the public reaction has been about censorship and those prohibitions, those bans. And I would like to extend this question to Ellen, who talked about this context in Hong Kong, and Tony, if you would like to give your 2 cents about Brazil, that would be great. So whoever wants to start, please go ahead.
I think in Hong Kong, the censorships has been going on in different sectors, not only in the LGBTQ, but as I have pointed out, that since Hong Kong being handed over to China in '97, there is we can see the difference between the LGBT culture in Hong Kong and the activists in mainland are quite different, because in Hong Kong, actually, we are more privileged, because still we have the tradition from British that we are embracing human rights and the all the values that the Western civilization has been, passed down to Hong Kong culture. That human rights and individual, minority, like LGBTQ's rights, have to be protected. And And still a lot of, more than 30 years after the handover, still a lot of Hong Kong people believe in this. And so after the 2019, the massive protests in Hong Kong, and the violence in the street against the government to set up the extraditional law in Hong Kong, and there is violence confrontation between the police and the protester. So that's why in 2020 the national security law was implemented in Hong Kong, and that is quite an frightening law, because it was not clearly state what is the what act would give would violate the national security, because it's so broad and so abstract, and even a very minor or unrelated act can be, if the act arouse like negative feelings in Chinese authority, then maybe you are not, can be sued for, can be arrested for the national security law. It's very vague what they are expecting. The red line is not clear, and even if it's clear today, it can change tomorrow. So there is no. So we are not very clear how to, to voice out our rights or demand. And also so self-censorship actually, after the national security law, we have seen a lot of censorship in the experimental film festival, for example, where young artists are producing film, and the censorship sometimes would take away maybe a few dozens of movies. And there is, even for video dance festival, we see abstract video dance or movement dance or movement video will be censored. I mean, there is actually bizarre reasons behind what they are looking for. So at the moment, yes, there are self-censorship going on, and I think it's quite, we don't have the energy to really test the water, because I think since we have, communication between different cities are very easy, or different cultures are very easy. I think a lot of people are finding opportunities to voice out what is happening in Hong Kong through other channels. Maybe not within the city, but they can always travel and doing online lectures and presentation, doing exhibitions elsewhere to tell the story of Hong Kong.
De novo a questão das redes, né, de conseguir movimentar.
Once again, it's about networks and trying to tell our story in a network. Tony and Stella, would you like to make any comments? Yes, please, Mateus. I would like to give you more details about what happens in Brazil, and of course, I would like to invite you to share your comments about the presentations and exhibitions in the Brazilian museums that promote this topic. And I believe that the public that comes in contact with these arts, they are all provoked in some sort of way. And I believe that in the exhibitions that you have participated in, that is also the case. There are demonstrations that happen because of these arts and exhibitions. There was actually a very violent fascist demonstration against one exhibition that happened here in Brazil, and some museums decided to promote those actions dedicated to queer people, and sometimes they have to shut down those exhibitions because they are usually held in public spaces owned by the city or the state government, and politicians will order those spaces to be shut down in a very authoritarian way. We had an event called Museum Spring here in Brazil, and there was a number of museums in smaller towns in Brazil that dedicated some actions to LGBTQ people, and they had to be shut down because some political groups and powerful people in those towns requested those exhibitions to be shut down. They ordered them to be shut down. So that happens every other week here in Brazil, if not every week. There is censorship perpetrated by conservative, LGBTQ-phobic, fascist groups.
Bem, deixa eu ver a outra pergunta que chegou aqui pra gente.
I think we have another question coming from the chat. A question from Giovanni. My name is Giovanni. I am a trans person and I am a teacher in Brazil. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate. About what Professor Stella said, how can we excavate and find notions of joy in dissident bodies?
Right. Wonderful question, Giovanni. I think for me that especially in difficult times of criminalization and demonization and alienation, that one of the ways I have seen art work is by this very resistance that says we are joyful. We congregate in times of sorrow, and we make merry. And some of the times I have seen this has been in gatherings around death. I think that Tony's work focused a lot on violence and death. And some of the most beautiful, endearing work that humanizes queer people and queer gatherings that I think has not been kept and shared beyond the safe spaces of queerness in places like Uganda is this abundance of joy, even amidst terrible, situations, rejection by family, going to court and all of that. There's a joy. And I think for me that some of the photographs in the archives I have looked at are amazingly powerful. I think that the issue around self-censorship and the issue around artists protecting individuals has needed for a fictionalization of the work that is presented, at least from places like Uganda, where I think in terms of negotiate for the peers who are captured by film, documentary, photography, and much less by art and painting and maybe music and literature, is where true life stories are being told. And I think for me that negotiation between depicting joyous people in real life and the need to protect bodies who are targeted by the state is an important conversation. But yes, I agree in terms of resistance and hope and mobilizing community. One of the things that Ellen said was, we do not need pride right now as it is constructed in the West. We want love and acceptance. And maybe some of the ways we can reconfigure gathering is around gatherings of joy and depicting these and presenting them without taking away the violence and pain and shame and rejection that happens. And I think for me that some of the most enduring ethnographic memories I've had are in gay bars, at gay weddings, or coming together to have a meal, the sort of jokes and hilarity that happens when we prepare drag contests, etc. There's a joy that is not captured as often. And I find that genres like poetry, music, the novel, and literature, and then abstract art are powerful resources that one can use. Part of the problem is the elitism. In Uganda, art, fine art, the arts, high culture art are very elitist, and the gatekeeping to enter the discipline, to enter the industry is very, very high. And a lot of local artists who are queer or pro-queer, therefore often are doing private work. I think one of the earlier discussants from the chat mentioned being an artist, but they're not brave enough to share their work. One of the barriers I find is the elitism and classism, and also the income. Art is expensive to produce, to share. And so again, the collaborations with funders and funded spaces are important. I wanted to ask and also comment on the issue of the urbanity, the urbanness. In Uganda, at least, art belongs in the cities. Art belongs in museums and galleries and universities. And there is a less valued art on the streets. Protest art, graffiti, murals, very rough caricatures, art that risks devaluation. Classes of valued work are done, but art that is still very important. What I haven't seen a lot around queer art projects and representations is rural spaces. The village, I think just now Tony talked about small towns. What about the village, the rural area? Because I find that sometimes the most organic sorts of expressions and representations are happening with rural artists who don't even begin to enter the index. So how do we become more inclusive of that genre, first of street art, protest art, local art, ghetto sort of art that represents queer people, and also the rural area? How do we become more inclusive of them?
Tony, por favor, se quiser comentar.
Tony, if you would like to make any comments, please go ahead. I am very happy about Stella's answer. I'm not going to add anything to it. And Ellen, if you would like to add comments, and if you would like to ask questions to each other, please feel free to do so about rural art and how art is manifested in rural areas. Well, in Brazil, we can see that being more prevalent in music. I don't know what it's like in Hong Kong, if there is any differentiation between urban spaces and rural spaces.
I think recent years we have Island Festival where a curator would organize outdoor installation or workshops or like organic farming in the outlying islands in Hong Kong. There are actually quite a lot of outlying islands besides the main island, Hong Kong Island, and the Kowloon Peninsula. There are a lot of outlying islands around Hong Kong. And in the last few years, yeah, we have the Island Festival, which is quite impressive because the temporary public art that was built in the festival, in the outdoor areas, like in rural areas or around the shore on the island is very engaging because mostly the artists would live in the installation or the exhibition place, the village or the homes of the locals, and produce the work during the residence. And one of the reasons why this festival evolved is because in thinking about the politics that's in Hong Kong between the new, I mean, between China and Hong Kong, there is quite a lot of different cultural difference that spark our identity, that spark the difference of our identities and recognize the mainlander that belongs to a name that belongs to the mainland Chinese area, which is not an island, and compared to a peripheral place like Hong Kong, and we have the island to start with. And there is also a figure from the make up a fake folklore about Lo Ting, which is also coming from the island. There's and now a lot of young artists or subculture art groups, they would use Lo Ting, this fake figures, creatures that has the half body fish, the upper half body as fish, and the lower half walking human leg. And so these fake creatures symbolize the uniqueness of a Hong Kong culture, that we are living beside water, and our ancestor belongs to the sea, and this I would say like kind of a fairy tale becomes this creature becomes a symbol for our resistance to be autonomous and independent. And as I have said in previously, that the human rights condition in Hong Kong has become worsened in the last years, and even Lo Ting, these fake creatures are not one of the targets that the censorship has been going on. And yeah, so I think the rural area is one of the geography that also we as a fringe compared to the mainland, we are the fringe city, and also our culture are quite different from the mainland, and so we are using the rural areas and also the islands to express our uniqueness and also our memory or fantasy of our past and also our future.
Muito bem. A gente já está indo para os momentos finais, né?
We'll now move towards the end of our meeting. We still have 15 minutes left. There's another question I would like to comment on, and it relates to religious aspects. How can the conservative thinking, how is conservative thinking related to religious groups like new Pentecostal groups? They're very significant in Brazil. They grow year after year, and a significant number of these religious groups also have persecuted LGBTQAI plus agenda, and now they're also part of power. So considering the context you live in, how do these religious practices influence on these issues?
Quer começar, Stella?
I mean, one of the common knowledge, what everybody knows, is that the Christian right, so evangelicals, partnered together with the traditional Church of Uganda, which comes from the Anglican Church of England, and they partnered with the Roman Catholic Church in Uganda, and more recently, they partnered with the the Muslim traditional leaders to push the legislation, the total recriminalization of homosexuality. Many times religion has been a source of respite. During our civil wars, people ran to the churches, and we had a liberation theology where the religious bases were helping with education when the state had failed the education system, with health in terms of giving hospitals and medicines and religious medical health workers. In the case of the anti-homosexuality lobby, the fight against decriminalizing homosexuality in Uganda, all these factions which were pro-people before have turned against LGBTIQ people. The dehumanization, the debasing, the demonization. I think one of the things that Ellen talked about was the conversion therapy, the psychiatric treatments, the deliverance and exorcism that is doing a lot of damage to especially younger LGBTIQ people of faith. It's prevalent in Uganda. And I think even before affecting art and the art industry and the expression thereof, one of the psychoses, one of the madness of a homophobic nation and a homophobic majority is how it uses religion to abuse all the time, in the pulpit, on the messages on radio and television, to abuse constantly in the name of Sodom and Gomorrah. Those scriptures in the Bible about God or the gods punishing the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, it's very injurious, especially to people of faith. And Africa has a lot of spiritual people. We are spiritual from our ancestry, but we were also colonized into particular spiritualities as Christians, Catholics, whatever. So the role of religion is very difficult to divorce from homophobia. Having said that, I want to say that the last 10 years, because we first had the criminalization of homosexuality in 2009, 2014, and then we had a break of about 9 years, and now we are recriminalizing, that we have seen the rising up of pro-queer affirming churches which are opening their doors to alternative interpretations of the Sodom and Gomorrah accusations, churches where sometimes it's queer religious leaders, queer clerics, queer pastors, or pro-queer pastors open up their doors to minister healing and to change the narrative. Part of the problem with having religion and the state infused, as happens in Uganda, is that many of these leaders, especially when they come out in the public, many of these religious leaders are then excommunicated. We had an archbishop from the Church of Uganda who was very active in the organizing against the anti-homosexuality bill of 2009 and the law. He was excommunicated from the church. And we also have Roman Catholic priests who are named for offering, healing services where they're teaching God loves you, God created you as you are, don't listen to that message about a punitive God. They too have been in the tabloids, and some of them have been not necessarily excommunicated, but they are suspended from working as ministers. But so there's an underground organization, some pro-queer LGBTIQA+ affirming religious clerics and leaders. And maybe the very last thing I want to say around religion is the importance of African traditional religion, which when we got colonized by the British, they told us that our African traditional religions were demonic and satanic, and we have to denounce them, repent of them, get filled with the Holy Ghost of Jesus, get baptized. And this rejection of African traditional religion came hand in hand with civilization. So we were taken to Western type education, and to get a university degree or a qualification, often one had to undergo a lot of engineering to denounce the African traditional religion. But within African traditional religion and spirituality is an embrace, especially of transgender, gender non-conforming, third gender persons, because we believe that our traditional ancestors can possess a person, and if they're of a different gender, then the ancestor who's possessing a person could desire someone of the same gender as that person. And so a lot of shamans and priests and spirit mediums are actually intersex or trans or third gender persons. And in African traditional religion, this is accepted. They are venerated. We recognize them, and they're not associated to mental illness as biomedical religions and psychiatry relates these things of being possessed with the spirit too. So I just wanted to say that African traditional religion puts a spin on the issue of the homophobia that's generated by religious institutions, but also that within the broader religious movements, there are small departures we are seeing of LGBTI affirming faith, but generally, much more broadly, it's the homophobia that comes from one-track interpretation of Old Testament scripture as well as New Testament scripture. And religion can be dangerous, but I think we can also use it to reaffirm queer people and queer lives.
Muito bem. Ellen?
Helen, would you like to say something?
In Hong Kong, the religion is quite dominantly like Catholic and Christian. Two of the chief executive in Hong Kong are Catholic, and actually three, I think, yeah. So they have quite vocal in saying that they are not they personally are not supportive to gay games. We are organizing, Hong Kong is organizing gay games this month, actually. And but when they are preparing for the games and they ask for help, support from the government, the chief executive, the chief leader in Hong Kong would say something that because of their religion, they may not be able to like support. I mean, of course, they are representing the government, and so you can see that it's very hard for the gay games to organize themselves on their own, and but that is the case in Hong Kong because the government really is not trying to be helpful, and so actually this year the gay games, even though we have the we are the organizer, but we have to shift half of the events, half of the games to Mexico because we can't find proper venues to have the games, to have the competition. And of course, because of the COVID, also there is restriction to tourists. And there is a lot of other factors that affect why we have to share the games with another city in Mexico. This is just one of the stories that I found quite recent about the influence of religion to the LGBT community. But of course, during the protests, I think in the 2019, the protests, there is also two quite different religion people dealing with the protests, and I think quite opposite take in looking at democracy and freedom and that sort of ideas that is not really related in the religion, but yeah. So I think if we talk about the story of human rights movement, religion do come in as a very important factor in affecting the movement.
Muito bem. E Tony, você quer complementar para
Very
finalizar?
good. Tony, to wrap up, would you like to say something? Well, we can see how religion, and specifically some religious movements, persecute LGBTQIA plus bodies all around the world. And of course, it would not be any different in Brazil. Maybe the difference is that neo-Pentecostal, Protestant, conservative religions are not only on the streets, they are also part of the police groups, they are in politics, in public positions as public officials. So although Brazil is not a religious state, we no longer have religious freedom, because when some cases get to the hands of these people, they ignore cases against LGBTQIA plus people. The previous administration in Brazil had people with a strong religious bias, and no wonder during this period there were a lot of dissident body, LGBTQIA plus women, Black people. They were directly punished. They were the target of violence in Brazil without any accountability for those who persecuted and violated those people. So unfortunately, religion is still a problem. And still in Brazil, we see the growth of these religious movements. So today there's disputing the validity of a same-sex marriage. It's part of the Congress discussion in Brazil, because most Congress men in Brazil are elected by religious people. So those that decide the religion result, the election results in Brazil are religious people. And it's important to say that to Ellen and Stella, because we have the religious militia, as we call it. So we have drug dealers of God, as they call themselves. So they persecute LGBTQIA plus people on behalf of God, and they are drug dealers at the same time. So Brazil has these different religious groups, and religious in Brazil is freely available and is becoming very dominant.
Muito obrigado. Eu gostaria de agradecer a todos os nossos participantes.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank our participants, our guests, and I'd like to thank Tony Boita, Stella Nyanzi, and Ellen Powell. It was great to be able to hear you and to hear your perspectives. This seminar was recorded and will be made available on MASP's YouTube page. To wrap up, I would like to invite those in São Paulo for the collective exhibition of indigenous histories that is going to be on October 20th, and on October 21st there will be an on-site seminar with the curators of this exhibition. You're all invited, so follow us on our website and also on social media to know more about our program. Thank you very much and have a good day.